What? Yes, okay, that looks like it's recording. And certainly listen to this at 2 times speed, although my voice at 2 times speed would be miserable. What we're going to do is talk about the entire process of mediation and do it in the context of your mediator's speech, which is the way that the entire process starts immediately after everyone introduces themselves, which I will talk about in a second. The mediators have to give a speech detailing both what mediation is and what is going to happen in this mediation. I'll get into that more, but by framing the way this outline works and my lecture in terms of how you will do it in the speech will make a certain amount of sense, because you are going to have to explain it, so I'm going to talk about how you explain it in the speech and each individual part coming up. That said, there's something that happens even before the speech, which is party intros. Now, the important thing to know about what I'm about to tell you is there used to be, in the rules, that mediator speeches could be no longer than 4 minutes. So the entire 2-hour lecture that I'm about to give you used to have to be distilled down into only a 4-minute speech. Brevity being the soul of wit, it was entirely possible. That said, that portion of the rules has been taken out. That said, like the Pirate Code, it is a good guideline to follow. And so to the extent possible, when you are crafting your speech, if you can keep it to roughly 4 minutes, you can get all of the information in there without letting it go on, and the ability to condense it down to that much will demonstrate a level of understanding and mastery that I think has utility. So the first time you write your speech, read it out loud, say it out loud however you want. It'll probably be too long. 9 out of every 10 people write an 8-minute speech, and then one person writes a 1.5-minute speech. Do that and know that the goal is by the time you give it in the competition to have it 4:30. If you're much over 5, I'll give you suggestions on where to cut. But before you do that, you want the parties to go around and introduce themselves. When you only had 4 minutes to do this, it was very important to figure out how to do party introductions and not have it eat up a big chunk of your 4 minutes, because it's shocking how long it takes for everyone to go around a table of 6 people and say your name, your role, and the party that you're on. It takes almost a minute for that process to be explained and then to work. So the trick to it is use the co-mediators as a crutch. Have the person who's giving their speech not be the one who's doing these party introductions. So if I'm giving my speech first, I want my co-mediator to say, "Hi, I'm insert person's name. I'm one of your co-mediators. Can we go around the room, say our names, parties, and our roles, starting with me, hi, I'm yada yada, so on, clockwise, so on and so forth." That will take about a minute. Then when it gets back around, hand it out, say, "Okay, and now my co-mediator will begin their mediation speech." That there are some judges who still remember this 4-minute timeline, and that's just a very clean and easy way to keep them from conflating one person's time onto another. Keep as much of those 4 minutes as you possibly can. So that's the first thing that you're going to do. So you're then going to give your mediator speech, which is going to accomplish 2 broad tasks. 1, what is mediation? And 2, what will we do next? I will answer both of these questions for you in a second, but the other thing, just from a logistical perspective, that I want to talk about, and the one hill that I will suggest you attempt to die on with your co-mediator, is there in the rules, the 3 things that you have to do as a mediator is give a mediator speech, do something in here called a mediator reflection, and then run a caucus. There has been a move by some of the people who give this training that Diana was talking about that we are not going to go to unless for some reason someone wants to get the mediators to interweave their speeches. Because there are 2 co-mediators and almost all mediator speeches basically have the same information, they're trying to get them together. I would advocate for very much not doing that. It's a huge chunk of what you're being evaluated on as a mediator. This is the cynical reason, there's a non-cynical reason. The cynical reason is, in the competition, you're being evaluated on how you're doing as a mediator. I would not want to put what I'm being evaluated on in the hands of someone else who I do not trust to do a good job. I will have spent a lot of time on this speech. I will have cared about it. I will have practiced it a lot of times into a mirror looking like a crazy person, and I don't want to let someone else screw that up. So you will have roughly an hour at the start of the round in a room with your co-mediator. It's entirely possible they will really want to interweave their speech with yours. I'm saying 99.9% don't. If they're just completely intractable and going to ruin your round if you don't, fine, but try to make a reasoned, passionate argument for, no, let me do mine, you do yours. So they will.
You can go first.
Yeah, anything like that. And I'll get to it, but you will, when it comes to you as the second mediator to give that speech, acknowledge the artificiality of this. Okay, this is going to sound a little silly. I'm going to be repeating a lot of what my co-mediator just said, but sometimes if you hear same concept in different words, it's more understandable. Something to those ends, to acknowledge the artificiality of it, the silliness of it, but set it up. That's the path that I would take. Your mileage may vary. Virtually, if I can think of something up here that is just a hard and fast rule and you can't get around it, there's like one thing about where you have to talk about confidentiality. That's the only thing that you're not allowed to change. So everything else, if you have a good principled reason for wanting to do something to tweak what I'm suggesting, more power to you. Explain to me why that makes more sense to you, and we'll go with it. But like I said, I would try to keep my speech my own. All right, so let's jump into, so you're going to start, what is mediation? There are 3 parts to this. You are going to want to define mediation. Please feel free to look up a definition in a dictionary if you want, but the definition that I use, and also feel free to use this, is mediation is a conversation between 2 or more parties who are in conflict with a third party neutral at the table, whose third party neutral role it is to help guide them to a resolution to the conflict. It's a little legalese, but it's also very accurate. So come up with your own definition. This was the point that I was stopping and trying to remember. I have sent you guys a bunch of sample speeches. Totally fine if you haven't looked at them yet. I would say they are useful as good starting points when you are going to craft your own. They also come from a similar family tree, and if you trace it far enough back, I think my speech is the speech of all of the ones that are in the current batch of emails, but mine comes from a similar tree going backwards. Recognize that all of these speeches are written to the voice of the person who was going to give a speech, and that crafting your speech in your own voice is going to be the most important thing you can do. It demonstrates an understanding of the material if you can put it into your own words. So the starting point is probably going to be very similar to one of these speeches that are in there. And I can guess which one. I can guess a lot about your personality based on which speech you pick, because it'll mostly come down to whether you like very organized Word documents or very bullet pointy Word documents. Mine are the more bullet pointy. I'm a more ad hoc kind of a speaker. There are some people who need everything scripted out. Know yourself well enough to know what you want from that. And there are multiple different definitions in there that you can rep. So you will define mediation. The next thing you will do is you will juxtapose it with court. The main reason that you're doing this, as well as the next thing, which is define your role as mediator, is to explain that the type of advocacy that works in mediation is fundamentally different than the type of advocacy that works in a more adversarial courtroom scenario. And the reason for that is in a courtroom or in arbitration, the decision-making authority is vested outside the parties. So there's a third party who is the decision maker. When the decision-making authority is not vested with the parties, you want to make a certain kind of argument to sway someone to the correctness of your point. You want to convince them that you are right. When you take that authority and vest it in the parties themselves, different kind of advocacy becomes more effective. You are not going to be successful at telling someone all the reasons you're right if they themselves are the ones who have that decision-making authority. If explaining the reasons I'm right would have worked, you wouldn't be in this situation in the first place by definition. You need to come up with a different methodology of resolving the argument. And so the advocacy that works in a courtroom is different because the forum is different. And that's the kind of thing you want to emphasize. So while yes, you do want to talk about some of the advantages that mediation has over court in terms of resolving certain kinds of disputes, you're not doing that merely to bash litigation or, well, it has to be litigation, you can't mediate criminal cases. You're doing it to emphasize that the type of advocacy that you want to partake in looks differently in mediation. So you'll see in a lot of speeches stuff about time, stuff about cost, stuff about stickiness of outcomes, stuff about the craftability, your ability to come up with specific solutions in mediation that are unavailable in court. These are all good and important things to emphasize, but some of the earlier speeches will do too much of a job of trying to say, yay, mediation is good, which is a necessary part of the entire process, but it really should be more, your advocacy should look different, is the purpose of this part. Similarly, talking about your role, the easiest thing to do there is to juxtapose it against a judge or a jury. And because you are fundamentally a third-party neutral, you have no stake in who wins or who is right. I always like to think of it as you are not advocating for either side. However, what that means is you are still advocating for something, and that is a process that you think is going to lead to a good outcome. I think, Diana's in a mediation class, but I think there's a useful spectrum to put mediation on just to sort of help understand what your role is. And so there are two axes to this. One is the evaluative versus facilitative. I don't know how to spell that, so I'm just going to stop there. Facilitative. And basically what that is this is the type that we're not going to do, which is evaluative, which is you get some judge or litigator with umpteen squillion years of experience who is presented with a case from both sides and says, all right, I've seen 40 of these in my 50 years, and almost all of them end up right here, so you guys should take this. They are evaluating the case based on their experience. I'm going to guess that none of you guys are drinking youth serum in your off time, and so none of you have 50 years of experience in litigation and are able to do that. And while I am getting older than I want to be, I certainly similarly do not have the ability to do this. I would also argue that it's fundamentally a less nuanced and effective form of mediation that lacks some of the benefits of mediation in that you're forcing a settlement on people as opposed to tailoring it specifically to the individual dispute. And so on the other end is facilitative, where what you're doing is you're setting up a conversation that allows the parties to generate the solutions on their own and uniquely tailor them to their ends. So that's you want to at least get some of those ideas out and define your role. But the other half of it that is talked about less is the directive versus, and again, if this is some concept that they're teaching now and they've come up with what this term should be, tell me, I've yet to hear it, I call it passive. Are you familiar with it?
We've done this access. I think I know what you're talking about, but the words that they're using are
okay. This is, to my understanding, the current lexicon in academia, but I could be wrong. And as I said, I've asked a lot of people what they label this one. I've yet to hear anyone say it, and passive makes sense to me. So we're going to go with that. If there is a right answer, I'm very happy to be wrong on what the terms are. The ideas are what matter. So if this is how the decision is made, this is how the conversation is run. So you can either have, while in the evaluative facilitative spectrum, here you're making the decision on outcome, here you're letting the parties make the decision on the outcome. This one is much more process. So how much are you letting the parties guide the process? How much are you guiding the process? This competition is fundamentally facilitative, but it is less explicitly taking a choice on the y-axis. I am going to argue that we should be directive for a variety of reasons. The primary cynical one is you're going to a competition where you are being evaluated on how you perform as a mediator. So actually doing some performative stuff matters. Just sitting there as a potted plant and hoping you can silently pull the strings to get an outcome is just fundamentally not what you're there for. That's the cynical reason. The actual real world application is, I would argue, if you become a mediator and you become good at it, you have experience in mediation itself. You know how the process should go. You've done this much more than the parties who are coming to you. So being passive and letting them run their own ship, they've already demonstrated that if they have this conversation with each other, it's not working out. Put some faith in me that I know how to structure this conversation to help you guys get there. So I am going to push us in a more directive than passive approach. There are some schools, especially when we get into this section, who are going to be, it's the party's process, let them choose how to do things. They're not wrong. There's not a right and wrong anywhere on this chart. I'm going to make my passionate argument for a more directive approach, both in terms of you guys educating yourself on this process, but also from this is just what we're being evaluated in. But that will make more sense as we get into here. For the purpose of defining your role, it's important that you understand how you operate on both of these spectrums, and also juxtaposing that against a judge in court who is just the ultimate decision-making authority and what they say goes. That doesn't fit quite as neatly on here, because while you can make suggestions on how to do things, and even if you're an evaluator, you can make suggestions on outcomes, the parties are the ones who say yes or no. And because of that, it's important that they understand that they should not be appealing to you. They shouldn't be making arguments to you. They should be attempting to collaborate with the other party. And that's the idea that you want to get across here in this define your role piece. So then there's sort of a intermediate thing, which is smaller here, but I think the right place to put it is right in between these, and that is confidentiality. So mediation is a confidential process, and that confidentiality is a cornerstone of what makes it work. I, as a human being with no personal care of my right to privacy, appreciate this on an intellectual rather than a visceral level, but for anyone who is more normal than me, can probably appreciate this on a more visceral level. The idea behind the confidentiality is this is fundamentally a settlement discussion, and so in order to have an open conversation, you have to be sure that you are not necessarily prejudicing your side of the case by sharing information. So that's the principle behind which the confidentiality exists. The thing to know about it is, and this is the legal aspect of it, no new facts can be created in mediation. The other way to think about that is you can't use it as discovery by other means. If the parties give information in mediation, that information cannot be introduced in court from the mediation. If there's another way to discover that same information, that route is still open, but you said in mediation is never admissible evidence. And the idea behind that is to give the parties the confidence that they can have open and frank conversations without negatively prejudicing the case against themselves. So no new facts, but independently discoverable facts remaining so is the line that's in a lot of those speeches. Feel free to be jargonistic or as layman-y as you want on that front. But I do think it makes a certain amount of sense to pop in right there. You can put it later. You can put it earlier. That one's up to you. In my mind, that's where it fits. So once you've defined it, once you've talked about the confidentiality piece, you then want to get into what does the next 70 minutes of everyone's life look like. And for that, you're going to walk through these next few stages of what the negotiation is. And I will talk you through what each of these are, and you put the highlights in here. I like to think of the mediation speech as the table of contents for the mediation, because at every stage of this, you as the mediator are going to be teeing up each of the conversations, and you want to be able to say, as I said in my mediator speech, now is the time where we do X or Y or Z. Each of these transitions that you'll do in here, and that term will make a little bit more sense when I talk about it explicitly, that's the opening chapter of the paragraph. But in order for that opening chapter to make sense, it needs to have been at least suggested at earlier. So you're not going into in-depth detail on all of these, but you're touching at a high enough level that everyone is aware broadly of what's going to happen and why it's going to happen. So what we'll do next is going to logically pop into all of these. So you're going to finish all of that, then you're going to have the first transition where you hand it off to your co-mediator. And they do the exact same speech. Alternatively, if you're the one going second, all of these black things, these are what are the transitions. They will be in your co-mediator checklist that I will send out to you tonight or tomorrow or sometime before Sunday. And you basically just go through and agree with your co-mediator what's the order that we're doing all of these things in, who's transitioning from one to another. Like I said, there's a checklist and you can just write down next to it, me, you. But if you're going first, and now my co-mediator will say some words. If you're going second, thank you now, and insert whatever line you have about being hyper repetitive.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
For the directive passive piece that you talked about, is that something that we want to be on the same page on with our co-mediator?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason for it is especially, so this has to happen first. This also has to happen second, both logically and due to the way the competition is set up. Once this is done, you get into this more amorphous toss the conversation away from the mediators just talking at the parties and the parties talking right back to the parties talking together. Mm-hmm. And to my mind, there's a logical order of operations of how that happens. In order to effectuate that, you need to be directive. There are some mediators who are just, it's the party's process, and they will take your finely planned out set of what's going to happen, like, nope, don't care, they're going to do what they want. Mm-hmm. This is less of a hill that I would die on than the speech, but I think you can make at least a rational argument for what's going to happen, and the strength with which you make that argument should be based on how good a job I do of persuading you that this is the right approach. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so let's say they wanted to be super passive,
mm-hmm.
Then would you do the what will we do next spiel?
Which what will we do next? Oh, wait, which
in the speech?
I will explain to you at each of the logical transitions how to approach it from both of those places. Broadly, what I would say on that point or in negotiation in general is it's never a good idea to get in a knockdown, drag out fight over process. Mm-hmm. Instead, agree to disagree and then just model the process that you like in your action and let the person who disagrees with you do their own thing. It gets a little messy on some of these, but in areas where it's not going to impact things, just do your own thing and try to demonstrate why it is superior to the other side. Mm-hmm. That's basically going to manifest of once we get into here, which is basically the information gathering and agenda setting phase, spoilers moving on. If they want to be super passive and you want to be more directive, when you know what the agenda is, just sort of just be a little bit more directive. Don't name that you're going to do it, but just do it. It's actually in a disagreement on this side, this one's a little easier because it's the one that's actually doing something. So it's hard to, a passive one isn't going to tackle you and stop you from talking about it. No, the parties need to keep going. And in which case, if you've done your job right, the party's like, no, that was actually right. We'd like to move on. So you just sort of have the proof be in the pudding. All right, anyone else? This next bit is a bit of a bit, and we're at almost an hour, so let's take a short break to preserve my voice and try to be back here in the next 5 to 10 minutes. The longer the break is, the later we're here. So that's all I'll say about how long you guys take this break. Aaron, I'm pausing this. I hope this doesn't ruin the video for you.